Hi and welcome to a Najeela deck tech video or a Najeela statistics video or a top 10 best cards in Najeela. In this video we will be analyzing Najeela's win rate, while also looking at the performance in individual cards among a really high amount, 354, from a grand total of 183 decks. As always, this secret knowledge is coming from EDH top 16. And here we have Najeela the Blade Blossom entering into 43 times the top 16 from 188 entries and a conversion rate of 22.87%. The conversion rate means how often the percentage Najeela is getting into the top 16. So it's not the same as win rate. Now I've actually gotten a few questions regarding win rate and how I'm calculating this. For example, look at this. This Eric DeVito has 5 wins, 0 losses. That should be a 100% win rate, but still he has 2 draws, which gives him a 71.43 win rate. And some of you have asked that I should instead calculate the win-loss ratio and calculate the win rate from that. However, the questions we are asking is, how is Najeela performing inside a tournament? And a draw is equal to a loss. Therefore, the average win rate is always lower, somewhere than like 25%. Because when there's a draw, you have 4 losers and no winners. So there will be more losers compared to winner always, but normally it's like 1 winner and 3 losers, but sometimes there are 4 losers. But worry not, because what we're doing is that we're using the average win rate of the grand total of all Najeela decks together and compare them with other groups inside that collective. For example, look at this. Here you have Necropotence. So a result from 183 decks, you have an inclusion rate of 4.4%, which means that there are 8 people actually playing Necropotence or brought Necropotence into a tournament game, which means that that's a very low inclusion rate and the sample size is pretty mediocre. However, when we calculate the average win rate among those 8 participants, we can see that we're getting a better average win rate compared to the grand collective. So the average win rate is very important when you compare it to another value. But statistics isn't everything. Players' skill and luck matters too. I can actually showcase exactly what I mean. Take a look at this. Here we have a player called Mimo. Mimo is a player that I've actually participated and played on my cEDH TV gameplay channels. He's quite a talented player and he often plays Najeela inside tournaments. He even offers coachings and such. And if we look at his, specifically only his average win rate, we can see that he's the lowest he's ever gotten is 33.33%. His average is somewhere around 40%. So here you can clearly see that, yeah, player skill has an impact. If you scroll down, you're gonna find, let's see if we can find someone that is participating quite a lot as an example. Here we have a player who has participated in, oh, that's a little bit much highlighted. Here we have a player who has participated in a lot of various cEDH tournaments, and his win rate is a little bit different. He has a bunch of losses, he has a bunch of 20%, 25, 33, he has 50% too, but his average is lower than Mimo. It really looks like I'm favorizing my friend here. I don't want it to come out like that. I'm just showcasing that people attending tournaments, they are different people, and also discords are different. There are Najeela discords that communicate and talk to each other and coach each other to try to perform better. So the community in Najeela Discord have an impact in Najeela win rates in tournaments too. But back to card choices, because there are actually a few things we can learn from this. I want to showcase exactly what I mean. Look at this, Druid's Repository. There's a good question to ask. What Najeela combos should we actually include? What should we choose to play? And here you can see a difference. You have 45 entries with Druid's Repository, and the collective of average win rate among those is a little bit lower than the average. Okay, it's not a huge difference, but you can see a smaller win rate. Nature's Will was regarded as a very strong Najeela combo, but as you can see, the inclusion rate has really dropped and the win rate isn't that good. Now the inclusion rate is a little bit too small to actually determine a good value, that's to say that that win rate is correct, but still you can see that people aren't choosing to play it, and people not choosing to play it also indicates that it might not be that good anymore. While if we're looking at Darevi Imperial Practitioner, it has a really high inclusion rate. Now the win rate isn't actually that good, but that's because everyone is playing it. We shouldn't always look at the win rate a specific card is getting, we should also look at how many people are actually playing it, because that's also an indication of saying, yeah, that's a good card. Another card that is actually not included by everyone, Grim Hireling, have a 85% inclusion rate played by 155. And when you look at the average win rate, it is slightly better than the average win rate, indicating that maybe Darevi and Grim Hireling are the two or some of the better Najeela combo cards to go for, to include inside your deck, so to say. But we can look at that even more strategy here. For example, Ad Nauseam have a really high inclusion rate, and the average win rate is also a little bit better. And therefore I want to showcase this. Now this is a very low sample size, Archon of Emeria, but it kind of showcases that Najeela as a stacks commander is a not so recommended choice basically. But we can dig a lot deeper. Here we have Druid's Repository and Darevi together. We're currently looking at decks only, or well, we're currently looking at the win rate of decks that only contain both. The green one is the inclusion rate of decks that contain both Darevi and Druid's Repository together, and in the red section you have decks that don't include both, either none of them or maybe just one of them. And here you can see that the average win rate is bad, or not bad, but less or worse than the average. While here we see the opposite, Darevi together with Grim Hireling seems to be the good choice to go for. But we can actually make it more complicated. Here we have Ad Nauseam and Darevi together, and it has a very high inclusion rate, like almost 90%, close to everyone. 20 decks didn't include both. And here you have an average win rate that is good. Or good is always a discussion, but when you look at Ad Nauseam individually, you have 24%. Darevi individually, you have something like this, but when looking at both together, they have a better win rate, and that's because the combination, the pathway of what Najeela should be doing, gets quite clear here. You're trying to focus on both a basic Najeela focused combo, while at the same time playing that 5-color good stuff, which means that you're playing some of the typical effective combos inside this format, like Ad Nauseam. But look at this, Culling Ritual. The inclusion rate of Ad Nauseam and Culling Ritual is a little bit lower compared to the inclusion rate of Darevi and Ad Nauseam. Here you have 132 decks that did include it, and among those 132 decks, you have an average win rate of 25%, which suddenly means that you are now above average of the typical 25%. And of course the same thing can be said here. Ad Nauseam and Unruled Breach together seems to be a good choice. We're basically playing the Grixis package inside Najeela and combining that with some of Najeela's typical ways to finish the game herself. So you have like two different pathways, Focus Najeela and Focus Grixis Turbo Ritual, Storm stuff. That could win the game in something like this. And then when you go back and compare that to other Najeela strategies, you get something like this. There were 7 decks that did go into tournaments or games with Yetmir Nexus of Revels. I've never actually said that creature's name before, but the win rate here wasn't equally good. Same thing with Ledger Shredder, seems like a good card to in general include, but very low inclusion rate, but the 6 decks that actually did had a sadder win rate. Orcish Bowmaster have been included with an inclusion rate of 23%, 42 decks, and an average win rate lower than the collective of all Najeela decks together, while Opposition Agent have an average win rate higher than the total average. But it's kinda cool to actually evaluate new toys as well. Samet Visser of Naktamun have a really good win rate among the average that is including it. Phantasmal Image seems to be performing quite good. Wishclaw Talisman is also performing quite good. The One Ring is actually performing really good. And this is not a low inclusion rate. Summoner's Pact is not played by everyone. I actually viewed it almost like an auto-include for Darevi, but yeah, for Najeela. But apparently it is a 50-50 split, but the decks that choose to include Summoner's Pact have a pretty good win rate, so it is a good indication that this is a card that is actually performing quite well. Lofo, Corrupted Sheriff, also seems to be performing quite well. It's just a good card in general, in my opinion. Could be included in a lot of different decks. Like, I think this video is offering a showcase of card potential a little bit more outside Najeela, so to say. But I want to point something out here. We're starting to look at something of interaction here. Gilded Drake is an interactive card that is giving you some form of value. And here you can see that the win rate isn't as good as the average. I would like to point out that I've actually looked at Gilded Drakes in other videos like this for other commanders, and it seems to be consistent. Gilded Drake's win rate, individual win rate, isn't equal to the commander's average win rate in general. But let's look at another spot removal, Abrupt Decay, considered to be one of the best things, quite heavily included, 44 inclusions, 24 inclusion rate, lower average win rate compared to the average total of all Najeela decks together. So now you might draw the conclusion of, maybe we shouldn't play that many spot removals. Incorrect. The question is the ratio. What amount of spot removals should we play and which ones should we go for? Chain of Vapor, a 20% inclusion rate and a pretty good win rate only looking at Chain of Vapor. But once again, we can combine it. However, in this situation, we don't really have a huge sample size, so it's very hard to actually say anything. If the sample size was higher and you had this indication and then you have this indication, the takeaway could be that Abrupt Decay might be good, but maybe you just need more spot removals. The inclusion of only Abrupt Decay doesn't seem to be enough. But once again, this specific situation is very low inclusion rate, so it's hard to say anything from it. This one is a little bit higher. 20% of the decks did include both Chain of Vapor and Silence, and they had a pretty good average win rate from that. Cyclonic Rift and Silence together seems to be pretty good. Silence and Swords to Plowshare together seems to be quite okay. But Abrupt Decay and Swords to Plowshares had an inclusion rate of, let's go 16%, and it's not the best thing. So maybe you just need like one of these two. Now, one of the big reasons why Chain of Vapor is really good is when you combine it with Andual Breach, or the Grixis Stormy strategy, so to say. You see, you can cast your Chain of Vapor on your Mana Crypt, your Dockside, and you sacrifice your lands to bounce more Ritual Mana Rocks back to your hand, and then with the last Chain of Vapor you sacrifice your land and you target one of your opponent's stacks pieces. You have literally created a Ritual and a removal from a stacks piece, and then you can go and win with your Andual Breach once you've removed that Dranat Magistrate or Grafdigger's Cage. So once again, fine-tuning the choice of what kind of interaction you want to have. So we've started to get a good picture of a recommended pathway of what Najeela should be doing. If we take a look at a Najeela decklist example on Moxfield, we find this. Here we have both Darevi and the Grim Hireling, Value Engine, we have Simian Spirit Guide, Ranger, Phasas, Bragavan, Esper Sentinel, Elvish Spirit Guide, Grand Abolisher. We have the Cooling Ritual, Meme Betrayal, Ad Nauseam, obviously, Chance of Glory, Final Fortune, Undual Breach, and actually we also have Druid's Repository. The next deck list in line is playing more creatures actually. Samut, Vizier of Naktamun, Darevi, Archivist of Ogma, Esper Sentinel, Grand Abolisher, Lofo, a little bit more Mana Dorks, Spell Sky to protect Najeela actually. Still playing that Cooling Ritual, Undual Breach, actually Flowering of the White Tree. A little bit skeptic about that one, a personal note. But he's not playing Druid's Repository. He's playing the One Ring though. We're almost done, but there are a few more cards I would like to showcase that I find a little bit interesting. Warrior's Oath. 2 red, sorcery. Take another turn after this one. At the end of this turn you lose the game. But it has a really good win rate, average win rate. Very low inclusion rate though. I actually think that Final Fortune is a great card, highly recommend it. Now Final Fortune is getting a lower win rate compared to the Warrior's Oath, but that's just because everyone is playing it. But take a look at this when decks include both. because that's actually the thing with Warrior's Oath. You're not including Warrior's Oath unless you've already included Final Fortune, basically. But it kind of showcases a directive of what people should be focusing on in cEDH in general. Trying to kind of all in, I guess. Of course, however, you're choosing Chance for Glory before you're choosing Warrior's Oath as well. But a small takeaway might be to consider all three, or just get a picture of what is kinda good at focusing on inside this format. And maybe things you shouldn't focus on inside this format. Shatterfang Squirrel General is such an amazing all-star for Najeela, but I actually never thought it was that good. I mean, you're creating a lot of tokens, sure you can sit and spot remove, and it's not terrible, the win rate is not that bad actually, but it is still a tiny bit below the average, where this is better than the average. Now, like I said before, we have something of 354 unique cards. And I think if I'm gonna sit here and like try to go over all of them, it's gonna be a very long and annoying video. I tried to highlight the key ones. Now, you're not seeing the inclusion rate, you're only seeing like the win percentage. I will go over this a little bit slower so you can take your time. But if you want to ask any specific questions regarding any one of these cards, feel free to ask that question in the comments below and I will write it to you in the comments. But if you have any more suggestions of what you think this YouTube channel should showcase when it comes to this kind of style and statistics, feel free to leave a comment and feedback below and I will try to implement that method. I personally really like this kind of video and it is a concept I want to improve upon. And I really hope you're interested in its future developments. Once again, it's just a pile of statistics that is very hard to say anything set in stone, but I think it's a fun thing to look at into and sometimes you can actually make some conclusions from it. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time, guys.